December is
December.
December sounds good. In December, hopefully.
December.
UFC 296 will be taking place in Las Vegas. It's the final card of the year. And like I just mentioned, with it being in Las Vegas, you already know the UFC is going to stack that card. But the question on everyone's mind is, who the hell is going to main event in December?
No, I swear to God. Swear to me.
So many potential options, so many rumors. We're gonna break down, which possible option could we see on December 16th. Please, you guys, like the video, subscribe, and comment down below your thoughts. Right now, as it stands, there's 8 potential options for that main event. We're gonna break it down from 8 to 1 in a ranking style, with 8 being the least likely and 1 being the most likely. And before I get started, just a heads up, all this is rumor talk. This is speculation. I'm just going based off what I've personally heard and now what I've seen and what I believe that the UFC will do. So just take it as a grain of salt. But okay, coming in at number 8, we have Israel Adesanya versus Dricus du Plessis. So the reason this is being number 8 is because actually next week the champ Israel Adesanya actually fights against Sean Strickland in Sydney, Australia. And so originally in that date we were supposed to get Dricus versus Izzy to headline, but because Dricus was injured at the time and was unable to take the fight, the UFC instead went towards the direction of Sean Strickland.
So here's the thing, you guys.
To say the least, though, in many fans' eyes and in the UFC's eyes, they still want that Dricus du Plessis fight to happen, and you can bet that he is still the #1 contender, after his last win over Robert Whittaker, which was, God, so impressive. And so with Israel being such an active champion, fighting anywhere from 2 to 3 times a year, that puts him in an interesting scenario, because if he goes out there and just absolutely starches Sean Strickland, does whatever he wants with him, we could see him turn right back around and headline in December in Las Vegas against Dricus du Plessis.
You're gonna get left frozen like Elsa.
Which, if that is true, kind of would be a bummer, because everyone wants to see that fight happen in Africa. It just makes sense, the 2 African fighters. And while the UFC has always, shown interest in going to Africa, they still haven't pulled any plugs to actually, make that happen. So you could probably bet that if that fight were to take place, it would be somewhere like in Las Vegas, in, like an MSG, in a bigger arena that would support the stardom of Israel Adesanya. Like I said, though, we still have to see what happens next week in Sydney. But, if the fight takes place how Israel wants and he doesn't take any damage, you can almost bet that he's going to be back at the end of the year. At number 7, we have Dustin Poirier versus Max Holloway 3. And wow, this one is such a banger if it were to come true.
No way, bro.
Now, as it stands, this is a rumor right now. Max Holloway just fought literally last weekend in Singapore against the Korean Zombie, where he put out another, of course, blessed performance.
If you want to beat the best, you got to be the best. And the best is blessed, baby.
He finished the Zombie and sent him into retirement. And so after the fight, it was coming out that Dana White was not a fan, or is not a fan of making a 4th fight with Volkanovski. Because at this point, what do you do with Max Holloway? I mean, he just beat Arnold Allen, just beat Korean Zombie. Probably the next step would be to fight Volkanovski, but he's already lost 3 times to Volkanovski, and those have been fights that have recently happened. And so before the fight even took place, there were a lot of rumors and speculation going around saying that his next fight after this would be, again at 155, for him to move up to a weight class and just get a fresh new start is, what the idea is for Max Holloway. And so, of course, now rumors are coming out that Dana White is actually getting ready to announce Max Holloway's next fight, which is crazy because he didn't take any damage in that fight, and we know that Holloway likes to be an active fighter. And so if we're assuming it's going to be at lightweight, there's only a couple options. And you know, with Max Holloway being the #1 featherweight in the world, it's kind of hard and tricky how you book him at lightweight because, like I said, there's really only a couple options. There's Justin Gaethje for the BMF, which fans are super excited for. That would be such an amazing fight.
People keep harassing me about Gaethje anyway, so...
But it seems that Gaethje has no interest to fight this year until next year, and he wants to wait out to, you know, see what happens with the lightweight title. But the second option is a man that just recently confirmed that he wants to fight again this year and, you know, stay at lightweight, which is Dustin Poirier. You know, a lot of people thought he might actually move up to 170 just because of the way he was talking after his recent loss to Justin Gaethje. But yeah, it's, you know, he kind of doubled down and he's saying that he's staying at lightweight and he wants to fight again this year. And so with their first two fights being absolute fireworks, I mean, that second fight was a dog fight. You know, who knows how this third potential fight could play out. We've seen Max rise to a different level of you know, competition and how elite he is over the rest of the featherweight division. And you know, Dustin is still more or less the same fighter, but just really good. He's still, you know, being able to get wins over these really good top elite lightweights. I don't have to try to sell you on the fight because everyone's gonna want to watch that fight. You know, Dustin Poirier versus Max Holloway, that's an absolute banger. But it's just a question of if indeed this will take place. We know that Dustin has said that he only wants to take fights that excite him, and of course Max is right up that alley. So this is a potential fight that could take place in December, and I could actually really see the UFC, you know, booking this one, seeing that Dustin Poirier is able to, you know, draw and hold his own with the pay-per-view. So coming in at number 6, we have Alexandre Pantoja versus Brandon Royval. This would of course be the champion's first defense in his title reign. He just won the belt in July in that fight of the year against Brandon Moreno, and he would be taking on another rematch in Brandon Royval from their fight back in 2021, which, you know, for how long it lasted, it was a banger. And man, with Pantoja's new fan-friendly style and Royval's also fan-friendly style, the way they walk forward and try to walk each other down, the shots that they land, it will definitely, you know, be a fun fight to watch in December if it does take place. Which, speaking of, we are getting rumors actually that is the direction that the UFC want to go in. You know, they want these fighters to be on that December card. We just don't know about headliner necessarily. And so we do know this for a fact because, you know, they completely ditched the idea of having a rematch with Brandon Moreno just to give new shine and new light for the flyweight division, as you know, Moreno and Figueiredo for the last like 3 or so years have just been competing with each other in that quadrilogy fight. The question is though, you know, when Demetrius Johnson was a world champion, he was only, you know, having those co-main event spots or, you know, headlining those fight nights defending his belt, and same thing with Henry Cejudo. The only exception was with Moreno and Figueiredo when they headlined, you know, that pay-per-view back in December, you know, of 2020, and then Figueiredo headlined the month before that against Alex Perez in November. So we have seen that the UFC are willing to give a spot like this to the flyweights. Keep in mind though, while those fights took place in Las Vegas, they did not take place at the T-Mobile Arena. They took place, you know, during the COVID times in the UFC Apex. So to be honest, it's a little hard for me to see Dana White giving such a big spot to Alexandre Pantoja when this is his first title defense and he's not necessarily a star. He's definitely a star in the making, but he's just not there yet in terms of, you know, notoriety and popularity. Nonetheless though, it is still an option for the UFC with the fight being in works.
Hey, welcome to the Raw Dog Show. We want that belt next.
At number 5, we have Leon Edwards versus Colby Covington. Now, I think a lot of people are going to scratch their head with this entry onto the list because, you know, from what we were hearing from the UFC, from Colby, from Leon, and, you know, just reports and leaks coming out there that the UFC were trying to set this fight up for November in MSG to be the co-main event for Jones versus Miocic. Since then, though, we have heard word from Colby that Jon Jones didn't want him to be on that card, and so the UFC might have pulled the fight from MSG and, you know, potentially delayed it, which Dana White later clarified and said, though, those were all, you know, lies. But, you know, it's still interesting to think because, you know, November's not that far away. We're only really realistically like a month and a half away from November. And so with the UFC announcing fights for that MSG card as it gets closer to the date, it's interesting why they haven't actually officially announced this fight for the co-main event. It kind of makes me think that they're actually going to delay this fight and put it on UFC 296 in Las Vegas. And we know that the UFC is willing to give that spot to Colby because they've given it to him before in Vegas. When he fought Kamaru Usman the first time, when he fought Jorge Masvidal, you know, not to mention this is a fight for the world title. So of course this would be, you know, a headliner. You know, this fight to me seems perfect for the December card, but it is just kind of really like not talked about. You know, I haven't seen really anyone mention the possibility of this fight happening just a couple weeks later in Las Vegas in December.
I know they call him Edward Scissorhands because he likes to poke people in fights.
And to be honest, it would match up with what Leon has come out and said, which that he's targeting, you know, a return late in the year. So definitely don't be surprised if we see, you know, the second defense of the most aesthetic man in the world, you know, versus Colby Covington.
Leon Edwards is crazy aesthetic.
At number 4, we have Alexander Volkanovski versus Ilia Topuria. It seems to me and everyone else that, you know, Volkanovski's next fight will be at 145, you know, defending his belt for the 6th time against Ilia Topuria. You know, a lot of people had questions after July when he beat Yair Rodriguez if he might, you know, go back up again and, you know, challenge for the lightweight belt, or if he might stay at 45 and just, you know, pick off a couple more defenses. Since, you know, we're kind of seeing that it's so easy for Volkanovski to have these defenses because no other featherweight is on his level.
Nothing wrong with being a virgin and a nerd.
And so per Ilia Topuria, you know, they want that fight in December.
If he's fan, he's good. We're gonna have a fight in December.
And per Volkanovski, they also want that fight in December. And so it just seems like a no-brainer. Like, why wouldn't you put this fight as the headliner for Las Vegas? You know, Volkanovski obviously has that star power, him as the pound-for-pound #1 fighter in the world. And the main reason is because he's injured right now. After his last fight in July, you know, Volkanovski actually had surgery on his arm, and reports were coming out that the rehab was going to take around 6 weeks. So if you just do the timeline, that puts us in around September, you know, then we still have October, November, you know, and then we get to December, which is still like 2-3 months away from the actual, you know, targeted date. So through that time, you know, with the rehab, he could go ahead and start, you know, getting ready for an actual camp. And if you know anything about Volkanovski, you know, he's always going to stay ready no matter what. He proved that last year in October, where even after he got, you know, surgery on his hand, he was still, you know, in Abu Dhabi, ready, you know, to be the backup fighter for Oliveira versus, you know, Islam, you know, the first time. I definitely wouldn't put it past him for him to be able to show up physically in December. And so now it's just a matter if the UFC actually wants to put that on for that December card. At number 3, we have Yuri Prochazka versus Alex Pereira. Back in mid-July, Jamal Hill went ahead and vacated his light heavyweight belt, leaving the division without a world champion. And literally 2 weeks after that, we were getting reports that the UFC was looking to put the belt on Jan Blachowicz versus, you know, the new light heavyweight in town, Alex Pereira. They went ahead and they passed up on the opportunity to get that done. But of course, after UFC 291, Dana White came out and he said that Alex Pereira is officially the #1 contender for the belt. He just didn't say who we will be seeing faced across from him. We assume it's either one of two people, either Yuri Prochazka or Magomed Ankalaev. But we just recently found out that Magomed will now be scheduled to fight Johnny Walker, which only leaves the former light heavyweight champion Yuri Prochazka. Now, of course, Yuri has been out for more than a year now with his nasty shoulder injury that he actually had to vacate his belt for in the first place. And we are hearing rumors and reports that the UFC are looking to make this fight happen between Alex Pereira and Yuri Prochazka. And that is, you know, the best news ever because, you know, as of right now, as of today, the division does not have a champion, and it's been 2 months now. You know, if we're gonna wait for this belt to be put, you know, past December, you know, that's, you know, another 4 or 5 months plus that this division does not have a champion. Alex Pereira himself has says that he will be coming back before the end of the year. And so realistically, if you do the math, that would set them up for a fight in December. And the reason I say that is because in October, we'll be going to Abu Dhabi for Charles versus Islam 2, you know, and in November, we're going to be, you know, traveling to MSG for Jones versus Miocic. And I do feel like there is a potential to put, you know, Alex Pereira on that card, but I just feel like for the sake of timing, for the sake of a training camp, and, you know, the magnitude of this fight, it just makes sense to put it in December in Las Vegas, you know, and you could absolutely do that and sell that with Alex Pereira. You know, he is a star. Yuri Prochazka is a star. This is a fight that all the fans are, you know, looking forward to. You know, this is definitely one of the more anticipated fights, you know, definitely in the division, you know, the number one for sure, but just all around in MMA. The question now is if the UFC want to save that for the end of the year blockbuster or put it towards next year. You know, if they do leave it for this year, that would be the second year in a row that in December the light heavyweights, you know, take the front center stage. At number 2, we have Conor McGregor versus Michael Chandler. Now, I'm going to keep this 1,000% honest with you guys. I have no idea if this fight's going to happen. This is a classic story of will they, won't they, will they, won't they. You know, originally we were hearing that the UFC were 1,000% locking this in for that December date. You know, McGregor, Las Vegas, you're giving him a willing opponent like Michael Chandler. I mean, it's just fireworks all around, and it makes sense, right? Well, it's not that simple. You see, right after the TUFF finale, you know, usually a month or, you know, as soon as the TUFF finale airs, they go ahead and they announce when the coaches are going to actually fight. They do it all the time. And so with this scenario, they still have not announced, you know, when the coaches are fighting. Not before the show, not, you know, during the show, not even, you know, when the fighters actually fought themselves. And originally, you know, there was that whole story that came out that McGregor missed his 90-day period for the USADA testing pool, which means that if he would have signed up for the USADA pool, you know, let's say back in July, he would have, you know, 100% be ready to fight in December. But because he missed that period, that he has to, you know, fight until next year. And soon as of last week, we were hearing reports that the UFC actually granted McGregor, you know, a USADA exemption for him to be able to compete, you know, fairly soon. They did this back a couple years ago with Brock Lesnar. You know, he wasn't in the pool and they just, you know, let him fight. And even McGregor himself, you know, came out in an interview, you know, during the Anthony Joshua boxing fight where he said Chandler in December. Michael Chandler has even been posting on his social media showing that he's already in training camp. And if you know anything about Michael Chandler, you know that he is a big lightweight. You know, he needs that couple months to get himself down to 155. And so with all that being said, we're seeing McGregor's, you know, footage coming out of him now sparring with Ian Gary, him receiving his black belt in jiu-jitsu, you know, videos, photos of him working out. And so it kind of seems like, yes, this fight might actually take place sooner rather than later. We also had that leak a couple weeks ago where on the UFC website, you know, for ticket sales, there was, you know, a leak saying that UFC 296 will be taking place, you know, with McGregor and Chandler as the main event. You know, McGregor even posted it on Twitter, but that was, you know, soon debunked by Dana White, saying that it was fake, that it was AI generated. And, you know, at the end of the day, who really knows? But in terms of a December date, I'm going to go ahead and say that this fight does not take place in December. I will actually say that this fight is most likely to take place in January. And the reason I say that is because I feel like McGregor has this little mental thing where he just likes to be able to compete in the beginning of the year because he feels that it is, you know, fresh, new energy, you know, kind of like how people feel about, you know, New Year's resolutions. You start in the beginning of the year and you're supposed to carry it all the way till the end, you know, and I kind of feel like that's where McGregor's mentality has been for the last couple years. You know, if you remember back in 2020, he fought Cowboy literally in the beginning of the year in January. Same thing 2021 when he fought Dustin Poirier. So potentially now we're going to see him fight in 2024, you know, in that January spot. But like I said, you know, it kind of also, I guess, doesn't make sense in a way because, you know, that fight most likely won't take place in Las Vegas, which, you know, to be devil's advocate, in 2021, that fight in January against Dustin Poirier, the rematch, that actually took place in Abu Dhabi. So at the end of the day, I could go rambling about this all day, but who knows? I honestly give it a coin flip on if this fight takes place, you know, in Las Vegas. And at number 1, we have Sean O'Malley versus Chito Vera. It's crazy to say, but the bantamweight division will now be put on this crazy next level pedestal because of the stardom that Sean O'Malley has. It is very, very similar and reminiscent of, you know, a 2015 Conor McGregor. The rise and the superstar that he is, you know, bringing all that momentum to the world title is just unheard of. You know, he's quote unquote undefeated. And that one man that did beat him in the fight, Chito Vera, is now in a perfect spot to accept the rematch. Both Chito and Sean fought a couple weeks ago in Boston. You know, Sean obviously becoming world champion and Chito beating Pedro Munoz. And quickly after, Sean took to the mic and he said, "December, Las Vegas, I want Chito."
I want Cheeto December in Vegas at T-Mobile. Let's go, baby!
And, you know, typically I've seen a pattern where contenders, they call for a title shot or they call for another contender. They usually typically, you know, I would say get it 50% of the time, maybe lower. When a champion calls out a contender, it almost immediately is, you know, guaranteed that that is the fight that's going to take place. And yeah, with the rivalry that they have and they have set up over the years with that first fight, it would definitely be very stupid for the UFC not to take the opportunity to book this rematch. Chito said December works, you know, Sean said December works. Now we just need the final word from Dana to put them on that card. And, you know, I guess the main reason Sean wanted to be on that December date was because of that Conor McGregor fight. You know, he wanted to be the co-main event, set that up as like literally one of the biggest pay-per-views of all time. But even if you don't put McGregor on that card, Sean O'Malley absolutely has the star power to carry a card on his own, especially with it being in Las Vegas. You know, I feel like this fight is almost 100% guaranteed to take place in December. That's why it's at the number 1 spot. So if you guys like the video, you know, please comment down below. Let me know who you guys personally think are going to headline in Las Vegas, December, T-Mobile Arena, UFC 296. Please, you guys, share the video, subscribe, and, you know, I don't even know what to say anymore. I'll catch y'all later. Peace.